Do you think some of the papers might go to the wall? In other words, those that haven't really progressed in web exploration and putting up strong websites. And people have always said this. I know we've always increased actually the number of print newspapers. But do you think that some might go?
Well, it's a complicated question because the other thing you have to realize about the British market is that it's not a market. It's not a market in any sense that anybody would understand. So you've got the BBC, which is a huge player, which is free. You've got Sky News. You know, if we tried to put a paywall up against our browser now, people can get free news from Sky News, you know, the Rupert Murdoch's bit, and the BBC, and ITV. They're all free. And then you've got the Independent, which has been rescued by an oligarch. You've got the Barclay brothers with the Telegraph. They're all, and you've got, you know, News International, the Times, which is a big competitor of ours, subsidized generously, God bless him, by Rupert Murdoch from another part of the company. So it's not a market in which you can say, oh, that one's failed, so therefore it's going to close down. Because I suspect if Lebedev bailed out tomorrow, there would be an Arab something or other. And I suspect if Rupert Murdoch said he no longer wanted to own the Times, somebody would say that's, you know, just we've had Conrad Black and Robert Maxwell and Richard Desmond. There are always people who want to own these titles. But as a market, it's obviously failed.
Fascinating, that, isn't it? There's always somebody there.
There's always somebody there.
I think we're going to be running out of time. So I'll do a couple of quick questions. One, just back to the hacking investigation for a moment. And there's been criticism of News Corp's decision to close the News of the World, which was probably promoted, the criticism, by the Guardian's Millie Dowler revelations, bearing in mind they've shown to be not wholly true or wholly accurate. Do you feel, or do you have any regret about being responsible for another paper's closure?
No, I mean, the Guardian didn't close News of the World, and Rupert Murdoch gave a very clear answer to the Leveson inquiry. He said, astonishingly, he said, I should have closed it much sooner. I thought it was an amazing decision, and I think it was a really bad decision, but it was absolutely his decision. And on the Millie Dowler story, nearly everything about what we've written in this story has turned out to be worse than what we wrote. You know, most journalism, when it reaches the contact with the real world, turns out to be, the truth turns out to be a bit more mundane. with everything that the Guardian's written from our first revelation that there were thousands of people who had been targeted right through the Millie Dowler, it was all true. And if you read it was all true or worse than what we wrote. And I think when the full story of, which we can't write about at the moment because of the criminal trials, when I think the full story of the News of the World's involvement in the Millie Dowler story comes to be written, it will turn out to be worse than what we wrote. And the only other thing that I would add is, you know, by the way, the police report didn't show that the story was untrue. It just said we can't show either way. And there was no doubt from that police report that Mrs. Dowler absolutely believed and told the police, and the police did not deny it, that the deletions on the phone had been caused by News of the World journalists' actions. And the day that we published our story, and this shows what a great reporter Nick Davis is, because when all those who've read Nick's stories recognize that he's written the truth. And the first person on the phone on July the 5th was Glenn Malcare, you know, the News of the World private investigator, who said, this is a devastating story. I feel I've got to say something. Can we meet? And so, you know, this man who Nick had been writing about over the years, and who was in many senses the arch villain, met with Nick in a cafe in central London. He poured his heart out and said, I'm going to put out a statement about all this. And never once during that conversation did Glenn Malcare say, oh, by the way, you've got that bit about the deletions wrong. So nobody thought that story was
I can't wait
wrong
for the movie. Listen, I don't know how many students are in the audience, but I thought there might be some. I do ask you two very quick things. When you were back in Cambridge, why did you Why did you decide you'd like to go into journalism? And has whatever you saw as being noble is too strong a word, but a career, a fine career, obviously you've done very well in terms of seniority, but have you realised whatever ambition was there when you were in Cambridge? Or whatever it was that you thought you'd
became
like
a journalist because I did lots of things when I was a teenager. What's now called, well, actually it wasn't a work experience because in those days you got paid for it. And I did tomato picking, and I did cleaning the brake linings of second-hand car parts, and I worked in Debenham's electronics department for about 3 years. And then I had the idea of writing to the local newspaper, and I went out and did this brilliant story about rabbit slayers. In the back gardens of Guildford, somebody was going around massacring all the pet rabbits, and from that moment I was hooked on journalism, and that's why I became a journalist the moment I left Cambridge. And it's been a fantastic. You know, who could beat the last year with WikiLeaks at the beginning of the year and phone hacking at the end of the year, and everything in between. You know, all the things that Alan's been covering. You know, the Arab Spring and the tsunamis and the collapse of the European financial institutions. It's been the most astonishing year, and the Guardian's had the most incredible ring seat or role in all of it. But the fascinating thing at the moment is that the very thing that journalism is a completely open question. You know, there are some things like verification that will always be part of the journalist's trade, but almost everything else is up for question. So in addition to these incredibly interesting events, you know, to be sitting there at the helm of, you know, a great newspaper thinking, what is this thing called journalism, and what's it going to look like in 6 months' time, 6 weeks' time, 6 years' time? It's the most invigorating thing to be doing.
Good stuff. I don't know why you're working in Debenhams. You're a terrific pianist. Why were you playing in a pub and getting some proper money?
Oh, wasn't that good?
Shall we take some questions? Are there any students in the audience? I can't believe there's not one. I wondered if any of you would like...
Some like students over there.
Have we got a student? Have we got a microphone? Have we got a mic? Can you give it to a student, please? Because I just think it would be fair for the students to be able to ask some questions rather than us older guys standing up and making speeches. Anybody got a microphone? Anybody want to ask a question? Well, I'm disappointed.
Yeah, well, there were a clutch of hands. So I see the students don't want to ask. Okay.
Students, but they don't
students don't want to ask questions.
Well, I'm very disappointed in you all. Hold on, there's
one there.
Please identify yourself. Just give us your name and where you're studying.
Hello.
Hello. Just give us your name and what you're studying.
I'm George. I'm studying media management.
Okay.
Masters. And I want to ask about data journalism, how it changes the trade. And because Guardian is basically the leading authority now in data journalism, and what is your view in the newest? There is a book now, Handbook of Data Journalism, I guess, and I would like to see your view on the matter, how it changes the trade.
Well, data journalism is a really... So who 10 years ago had heard of data journalism? You know, nobody knew what it was. It wasn't a skill within a newsroom. You might even say that of 5 years ago, that this animal called data journalist just didn't exist. And then you got, in The Guardian, you got people like Simon Rogers, who was working in the graphics department before, who just had a skill for working with numbers and graphics. Brilliant young people like James Bull, who works at The Guardian, and a team around, small team around them, but 3 or 4 people. And it is a completely different skill from, or type from, you know, the typical person who was good with words, who came into journalism because they could tell a story. and what they do is to take spreadsheets and torrents of data coming out of government, and you know, there are tons and tons of data that nobody's looking at the moment, and they spot patterns and they analyze it and they build graphs. And they find stories. And that is going to be, you know, something every newsroom is going to want and need in the future. And that's going to be an important, vital bit of this digital future that we're going into. And the work that they've done has been incredibly important. And you know, it comes back to the business model. I think there is absolutely a business to be made which newspapers are being a bit slow about, in saying government has opened its doors and local authorities and the police, everyone is being much freer with the data they're releasing. And newspapers are being a bit slow to capitalize on that because they're too used to thinking about words on the printed page.
Another, please.
There's one down there.
Microphone, please. Front row, thank you.
Hi, good evening. Just take it slightly back to Charles and Alan. There was a distinction opened up earlier between journalists seeking the truth and those who perhaps are digging for dirt, who you mentioned who might work for a News Corps. It seemed to me that tabloid journalists at their worst are always perpetrating lies about people in a kind of rather strange way. With the phone hacking scandal, a search, a kind of perverted search for the truth, to stand up scoops, to stand up stories in their essence. In other words, to hack people's emails, to hack into their phone. In other words, it's journalism following its logical course to a very dangerous end. If you see what I'm saying.
Yes, well, did everyone hear that question? There has been an argument made that phone hacking grows out of the British libel laws, that because the British libel laws are so punitive, you have to get the absolute proof. Is that your...
Yeah, so therefore, in a way, it's a perverted sense of desire to get an absolute truth.
Yeah, so therefore journalists, you know, the best proof was actually to listen into their phones, and then you got their... I mean, that is in many ways true, but it comes back to, you know, Bill's series of questions about the balance between privacy and... Because if you take that to the logical extreme, I mean, the apparatus that News International had established would have been the envy of the Stasi. Sean Hoare, the showbiz writer, just before he died, I had a conversation with him because the New York Times published his allegation that the New York, and this for some reason hasn't come up very much, hasn't come up at all in Neversond, but he told the New York Times, he told me, that there was a capability within the News of the World not only to hack a phone, but to track a phone. That cost 500 quid. You could find out where anybody was within 20 feet, and then you could listen into them. Well, you know, anyone who saw the lives of others, if the Stasi had that, they would have been deeply envious. And that's, you get into total totalitarianism if you say, well, that we have to follow that, and we don't care for privacy because freedom of speech is everything, and that's really dangerous. My main qualification is, you know, I've tried avoiding throughout this thing to talk about the distinction between tabloids and broadsheets because there are fantastic tabloids in this country. There are fantastic tabloid journalists, and I think it shouldn't become a debate about tabloids versus broadsheets. In many ways. It suddenly struck me the other day, Nick Davis, he grew up in the Mirror Group training scheme in the 70s, and sometimes Nick writes in quite a tabloid way, you know, in the best sense, very punchy, direct, with the story driven through a human narrative.
And Nick is about the moral compass behind it.
Yeah, well,
the search for truth.
On some papers, or one paper in particular, the moral compass went missing.